Hi, my name's Brendan Malone and you're listening to The Edge of Reason, the podcast which provides commentary on important issues without taking all day about it. Okay, so today is a bit of a momentous occasion for New Zealand in the sense that the first reading of Louisa Wall's gay marriage bill, the attempt to legalise gay marriage in New Zealand, is going to be heard in our Parliament today. To mark that occasion, the New Zealand Herald decided that it was going to publish a cartoon by the regular cartoonist Emerson. In this cartoon, Louisa Wall, who is the MP who is sponsoring this attempt to legalise gay marriage, sitting at the front of a bus dressed in the same brown coat that Rosa Parks, the civil rights activist, wore, and sitting directly behind her on the bus is a very angry-looking member of the Christian clergy who's looking down his nose with disgust and disdain at Louisa Wall sitting in front of him. Now, the title above the top of the cartoon reads, New Zealand's Rosa Parks. Basically what Emerson is saying here is that Louisa Wall is the New Zealand equivalent to Rosa Parks because Louisa Wall is promoting gay marriage. Now, I think it's offensive and I think it's irrational. Why do I think it's irrational? Well, I think it's irrational and unreasoned because it doesn't actually address any arguments that are being put forward by those who support the view that marriage can only be between a man and a woman and that you try and put any other pairing together, you can't have a legitimate marriage. There's a whole lot of coherent and very intelligent and well-reasoned arguments that are being put forward by those who support that view. But this cartoon completely ignores all of those things, doesn't address anything. It simply deifies Louisa Wall, who's promoting gay marriage, and really quite heinously insults anyone who happens to disagree with her. It's the equivalent of me drawing a cartoon of Louisa Wall with devil horns and glowing red eyes and then writing above it New Zealand's answer to Satan or something like that. People would rightly say that was offensive. They would say it was unintelligent. They would say it's a childish thing to do, and it doesn't bring anything logical to this discussion. It's simply an attempt, nothing more than the logical fallacy of ad hominem, where you attack your opponent or you deify your own position without actually justifying it any way or even attempting to justify your own position or trying to refute theirs. So that's why I think it's unreasoned and irrational. Second point, I think it's highly offensive. Why do I think it's offensive? Well, I think it's offensive on several fronts. Number one, it's offensive to the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was a movement that genuinely fought for human rights, and it fought hard and it fought against some very evil and huge injustice. We are talking here about a movement that fought against the unjust killing, African Americans who were lynched, who were beaten to death, the unjust treatment of African Americans who in a lot of places were not allowed to eat in the same restaurants as other people or to use the same drinking fountains or toilets. We're talking about a movement that had to overcome the system, that had to fight against politicians, that had to actually fight against laws where these things were enshrined. It took great courage. We're talking about a movement where people who stood up for these things were literally shot at, and some of them were even killed doing this. So to compare what Louisa Wall is trying to do with the civil rights movement completely belittles the civil rights movement and the great struggle that it was and exactly what they stood for. They stood and fought for real human rights. This is not a human rights issue, the gay marriage debate. What it is it's a debate about two different groups who disagree over the definition of what marriage is and whether the law should recognise one definition or another. That's what this debate is about. It is not about human rights. Civil rights and the civil rights struggle was about real, genuine human rights, and they fought hard against some extreme and huge injustice in order to secure those rights. As my younger brother said earlier today in a Facebook status, I'll quote it now, he said, logic fail. Comparing an elected official with popular support and legislative power, that's Louisa Wall, to a civil rights activist belonging to a segregated and powerless minority, and that's obviously Rosa Parks. If you're going to say that Louisa Wall is the equivalent of Rosa Parks, she's the equivalent of a civil rights campaigner fighting against injustice, then what are you actually saying about people who disagree with Louisa Wall? What you are saying is that they are the equivalent to the Ku Klux Klan, to the people who lynched, beat to death, who persecuted, who unjustly treated and opposed the genuine civil rights of African American people during the civil rights movement. And that, I think, is one of the most egregious and hugely heinous insults that is contained within this cartoon. That it suggests that anybody who happens to disagree with Louisa Wall is somehow a bigoted, intolerant, hateful, violent, malicious sort of person. That's really what is implied by this cartoon ultimately. Because if you're saying that Louisa Wall is like a civil rights campaigner, then what you're saying is anybody who opposes her is just like those people who opposed civil rights and treated African Americans unjustly and violently and very terribly during that period of the civil rights struggle. And I think quite clearly that is simply something that just has no place in a legitimate, reasoned discussion about issues. It's highly offensive. This is one of the downsides, I guess, to freedom of expression. You have people who express ideas that are extremely offensive and often very childish and totally inappropriate and do not bring anything intelligent or reasoned to the table. And I would suggest to you that in this case, this is exactly what this cartoon does. And it's really disappointing that someone like Emerson and the New Zealand Herald would support this kind of thing and would put it out there into the public domain. I would suggest for anybody who wants to read a more reasoned presentation of this issue, yes, it does come from the other side of this debate. There was an article that was published today in the New Zealand Herald by Bruce Logan on the whole issue of marriage and why retaining the current definition of marriage is so important and why it really does matter. And I think it's a much worthier read. And the important thing to note about this particular piece is it doesn't insult anybody, it doesn't belittle anybody, it doesn't call anybody names. It just presents a reasoned and logical case for why Bruce Logan thinks that we should retain the current definition of marriage. I'll post a link in the section below, the information below, so you can see both the cartoon and the article by Bruce Logan. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.